and that's like Scott's way of explaining why people work all 5 nights when like most people would do it once and be like, that's crazy, and never come back.
Ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs, the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. I'm your host with the Toast, Rye Toast, here to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's. This episode's going up a little late today, and I know that because I'm recording it as of 11 a.m. today, the day it's supposed to come out at 10 a.m. But it'll be out by like 1, I'm sure. Regardless, today's episode, I kind of wanted to take a look back at Security Breach. I haven't really talked about the game a lot in a while because we've been so focused with like Into the Pit and the week before and what it says about the beginning of the franchise that I haven't spent a lot of time looking at where the franchise is now. And one thing that really stuck out to me that I think is worthwhile to talk about right now is which animatronics do we think are possessed, right? Sorry for me adjusting the microphone. The lighting is kind of crazy, and the mic stand. I think if I had my way, the mic stand would be on this side, and it would be a lot easier to work with. But because it's not, it's like, to get it in a good spot, I either have to back the hell up, or be all the way to the left of my shit. But that's just because I've got a makeshift setup while we're in between places still. Regardless, I wanted to look back at Security Breach and specifically think about like which animatronics do we think are possessed. I think Underscore on Twitter put out a question like, what do you think Glamrock Freddy is? And it kind of sent me into a whole spiral on all of the animatronics of Security Breach and like, are any of them possessed? Because I think no, but like I've made a video on this exact topic, but I made it like the year Security Breach came out. It's been a long time and stuff has come out since then, right? We've had Ruin, we've had Help Wanted 2, we've had most of the Tales from the Pizzaplex books. So we've had a lot of like secondary information come through about these animatronics. So it really comes down to, with all of this in mind, 2 years after the game came out, with all of the hindsight and supplemental information we've gotten, are the Security Breach animatronics possessed? So I think we should go one by one. It feels like the easiest way to go. Although I will say the first one is going to be 3. Because I think you can group Roxy, Chica, and Monty together. I think that's a fairly like easy group to make. But before we even get to that, realistically, we should get to why the animatronics are acting strangely. Because I feel like one of the biggest arguments typically made for animatronics being possessed in this franchise is they're attacking people and acting weird. So why? And most of the time that's possession. But in Security Breach, I don't think that's true, right? The book, the Tales from the Pizzaplex, specifically the storyteller, gives us a pretty clear-cut example as to an explanation as to why they're acting this way. In the storyteller, the Mimic One program starts to modify the animatronics programming to theoretically create new stories for them to do every day. But immediately things go awry. And instead of that, their already pre-programmed personalities get like exaggerated and amplified to an unsafe amount. It's kind of the thing that we've been seeing and talking about for a while now, where like Chica is like a foodie. That's her character. But after the Mimic One program gets introduced into her systems, she's now a glutton and eats anything in front of her. Roxy was always a little like Roxy was like always a diva and a little full of herself, but now that the Mimic One program is inside of her, she is a narcissist and obsessed with herself and mean to everyone else. Monty, always like a meathead that like, let's party, let's rock kind of dude, now is a violent, angry creature that just attacks anything nearby. So it's that idea of they already had personalities programmed, but the Mimic One program exaggerated them to an unsafe amount, and that's why they're acting weirdly. But then the question is, okay, that explains why they're acting weirdly and attacking some people. Why are they so fervently after Gregory? We don't have as clear-cut of an example as to why, but I think the specificity of their attacks can be linked back to the Mimic One program we see in the games. The one that specifically is controlling Vanny, the one that likely was controlling Gregory before Security Breach, and the one that is likely controlling all of the animatronics in the Pizzaplex. The idea of like, I want you all to get that motherfucker, right? So, and that's why they're being specifically targeted at Gregory. Not necessarily because they're spirits trying to hunt down a child, but because the programming controlling them is telling them to do so. So all that in mind, we have I think we have enough non-possession pieces of evidence to show why they would be acting this way, so that we don't have to assume possession because they're acting this way. So that being said, are any of them possessed? And I think it's easiest, like I mentioned, to start with Chica, Roxy, and Monty, since they're all like pretty similar. I'm pretty handily sure they are not possessed, and I feel like the majority of the fandom agrees with that. As I previously kind of delved into, all of the quirks of them can be explained just through the Mimic One program. And we see that even when they're like battered and barely functional, like we see in Ruin, they're still following that programming. Granted, they're attacking Cassie now, but they're still doing the I'm going to act as myself, but way more aggressive, and I'm going to attack the things near me, right? And I think that's almost an argument against possession. Or at least an argument more for programming. The idea that even when damaged, they're still following this programming, where you would think maybe damage would help them break away and do more possession stuff. It's unclear. But I don't see a compelling reason for Chica, Roxy, or Monty to have to be possessed. That being said, I do hear some arguments for Roxy specifically because of the end of Ruin, where she's seemingly deactivated and then appears in the basement to save Cassie anyway. Isn't that possession? She was deactivated, but she's still active. I understand the idea behind that, and that is a plausible theory, but we do have another explanation, and it's that Roxy was never deactivated. In the daycare segment, and I think it's important that this happens in Ruin very early on to kind of show what this does before it happens again at the end. And that is, in the daycare segment, we have to turn on lights onto Sun and Moon to stun him enough to reset his programming and seemingly flush out Mimic One's control over him. Because we take our Faz wrench, put in the eye socket, turn it, do a puzzle, and suddenly Sun and Moon is fixed and is happy and, like, nice to you. Hold on, Casey's fucking shit up. So to me, my assumption was when we reset Sun Moon, it kind of gets rebooted into safe mode like we see Freddy at the beginning of Security Breach, and that safe mode flushes out the Mimic One program. So when we get to Roxy, our job is to deactivate her. So we put a Faz wrench in her eye, and we try to do that. We try to deactivate her. But all that does is force a hard reboot. Now, we leave immediately, and in the Mimic's point of view, because the Mimic can only see through the security network, Roxy gets turned off and stays off. Perfect, it worked. But if the safe mode reboot flushes out the Mimic One's influence and control over Roxy, then what could have possibly happened, and I think did happen based off of what we know about Freddy, Sun and Moon, and how the ending of Ruin happens, I think we hard reboot Roxy, we leave, and then after we leave, Roxy comes back online in safe mode, flushing out the Mimic One virus, and remembers that that little girl helped her and went downstairs. So now she's going after her. And that's why Roxy shows up at the last minute. I think that makes the most sense, and if that's true, then we need no possession for Roxy to explain that. So I really think, more than anything, those three are not possessed. And in the same vein, DJ Music Man, because DJ Music Man, like, yes, big, scary, and attacking Gregory, we get an in-game explanation, the room that he's introduced, as to why he's attacking. He's in security mode. Granted, does security mode kill? No. But it's very, like, I don't remember if this is actually, like, specified directly in game. I don't think it is. But it seems as though, I'm pretty sure somewhere there's a mention that there's, like, a setting you can fuck with. I don't remember if... I'd have to relook, to be honest, and I think I will before... This is probably going to be a main channel video. Like a main theory. And I'll look this up before I write it, but I swore there was like a duffel bag message or something that either said Vanny adjusted the strength of DJ Music Man, or that there is like a duffel bag that mentions like make sure to set the strength to the right setting or whatever. But to me, DJ Music Man seems like you turned on security mode, you turned off the safety, and that's just now your peon that will attack anyone who tries to stop you. Like that's what that seems to me. I don't think it's a possession thing. I think she's just using a robot against you. But frankly, those are the easy ones, you know, because I feel like the main the non-Freddy Glamrocks and DJ Music Man, I feel like most people agree are not possessed, and there's not a huge reason as to think that they are. So let's move on to some difficult ones, starting off with Burn Trap, immediately a very hard one. So when I made this video, like the year Security Breach came out, I said Burn Trap was one of the few possessed animatronics, because at the time, and to an extent, we'll get there, at the time, I thought that Burn Trap was the remains of William Afton after the FNAF 6 fire being piloted by the at the time the Glitch Trap program. We didn't know about Mimic 1 at that point, and possessed partially by the remains of William Afton, whether that be Remnant or just his agony. And I don't think I blame myself. I think that was the most plausible explanation until like the beginning of August this year. But in a post-Scott interview and Ruin world, I think that's less likely, right? So in the Scott interview with Dawko, he mentioned originally he never intended Burn Trap to move. The idea was Burn Trap was going to be a hallucination in the corner of your vision, like you're not really sure if you saw him, or you're turning your head and you see him behind something, you look back and he's gone, like this apparition that never moves but is always present. And that's awesome. But, you know, Scott didn't say that to Steel Wool. He just said, put this somewhere. So, like, you know, there was a whole miscommunication issue, and we get the Burn Trap boss fight. Now, he did say, and I do need to specify this, because I've mentioned that, like, the Scott interview changes how I see Security Breach. A lot of people are like, oh, so that means Security Breach and how it is presented isn't super canon. No. Scott ends that segment being like, but it's done, it's canon, and we're working with it. So the idea, I think what Scott is trying to say is, like, even if Security Breach didn't say exactly what I wanted it to, we are course correcting with Tales from the Pizzaplex and with Ruin, and subsequent games, and working on taking what we have in Security Breach and making it what we were trying to say. So that being said, I think part of that is the comics in Ruin showing us Burn Trap, right, as this thing that Gregory saw. And it's not necessarily something Gregory made up. I think the most likely interpretation of Burn Trap right now is it is a hallucination given to Gregory by the Mimic One program. So the idea, right, is when in Ruin, Cassie puts on the Vanny mask, there's that moment where you put it on, and then it's like inserting occipital nerve chip. And then she's like, ow, that hurt, takes off the mask, and she still sees Helpy without wearing the mask. And he's like, yeah, this chip will allow me to appear in your vision even without your Vanny mask. And we're pretty sure that Helpy is an extension of the Mimic One program. So my thinking, right, is with Tales from the Pizzaplex and GGY specifically, it seems damn near certain that Gregory was under the control of Glitch Trap before and possibly up until the beginning of Security Breach. But somehow Gregory breaks free of that right before Security Breach starts, or sometime soon before, you know, because Gregory seems a little lost and confused. So I think that is explained by breaking free from Glitch Trap. And maybe that's what the Balloon World arcade machine in the daycare loft is supposed to be. It's hard to tell. Regardless, if Gregory was working for Glitch Trap, then it's very, very likely that he was using a Vanny mask, just like Vanny and Cassie were. And if he used the Vanny mask, he would have gotten the occipital nerve chip. So even though he's not using the Vanny mask anymore, he can still get those hallucinations by the Mimic One virus. And that's probably why they keep finding Gregory wherever he's going. They're tracking him not only on the cameras, but that occipital nerve chip. So in my brain, Glitch Trap is what the Mimic One program appears like to Gregory now that he's still in Gregory's mind, but not controlling it, right? Instead of like the Glitch Trap suit that we see in Help Wanted or Helpy that we see in Ruin, we see the Mimic One program manifesting in Gregory's vision, but in a much more accurate to like the nature of it way. That being Burn Trap, this twisted, almost like evil demonic corpse. So I think that makes the most sense for what Burn Trap is. Less so a physical creature, and more so the digital manifestation of the Mimic One program in Gregory's vision. More of a hallucination. And I think that's epitomized by the fact that we never directly interact with it. Even in the Burn Trap boss fight, it's in another room, right? Like, we see it through the monitor, and maybe that's the Mimic, maybe that's who knows, but whatever it is, we don't physically touch it ever. And I think that's on purpose. Casey, you just get off. Stop. He's doing that shit where he wants to sit on my lap, but he keeps slowly sliding off as if he's going to fall. And every time I adjust him, he'll go to like play, aka try to bite me and wrestle, because he's, a dumb cat. And if I don't fix him, then he'll fall and try to catch himself with his claws. So I'm like, just stop. You're being annoying. But that's my thoughts for like Burn Trap. I'm just gonna get this out of the way now. I wasn't planning a sponsor for today's episode. I guess I will. Okay, look. If you use code RYTOAST on GamerSubs, you get 10% off, and I make money every time you do that. Just want to be super transparent about that. That being said, this is not a planned sponsor. I'm tired, and this is the pineapple cocktail like energy one. It's really good. But I need caffeine. Jesus Christ, I'm so tired. I will say, I like the new cup design. This is the Pixel cup they just launched. It's really cool looking. So I guess this episode's sponsored now. I mean, I wasn't planning, but I'm just tired. I was going to drink that after the podcast, but I'm too eepy to wait for my caffeine. Anyway, a reasonable question after talking about Burn Trap and my interpretation of it is, like, okay, if Burn Trap isn't a physical thing, but a digital manifestation of the Mimic One program, is the Mimic One program haunted or possessed, aka Glitch Trap? Is Glitch Trap part of some kind of soul or spirit energy? For me, it's tricky. For a long time, I had been thinking that Glitch Trap was the Mimic One program mixed with Afton's Agony, trained within Help Wanted. And that's why it's this evil, malevolent, like almost digital ghost controlling people's minds and trying to recreate William Afton. Like that was my thinking for a long time. But I'm hesitant now. The main reason I'm hesitant for this to be true is I still don't think that the Stitch Wraith stingers happen in the game's timeline. I think I don't know. I'm so on the fence with it, right? Because Fazbear Frights determines this outcome. If Fazbear Frights is true, then Glitch Trap can have William Afton's Agony within it, right? Because the issue is FNAF 6, that bunker underneath Security Breach, is only accessed by Vanny, Glitch Trap, and Glamrock Freddy after Glitch Trap has been created. So if William Afton's remains are in the FNAF 6 bunker, then Glitch Trap cannot be part William Afton. It has to be fully Mimic One. But if Fazbear Frights is canon, or at least the Stitch Wraith Stinger, like the epilogues of Fazbear Frights and their associated stories, if they're within the game's timeline, then Afton was retrieved from the FNAF 6 fire, before it was paved over with the Security Breach Pizzaplex. And then his Agony exploded over a bunch of things, and although it was collected and destroyed, who's to say that, like, one of the stray circuit boards didn't make it out? You know what I mean? Like, sure, the majority of Afton was collected, amassed, and destroyed, but there's a possibility that, like, one piece of it wasn't, and that's what the Agony came from to create Glitch Trap. That's super possible. But that's if Fazbear Frights is within the timeline. And games like Into the Pit, I'm like, maybe it is. Because, like, unless the Mega Cat Studios games are going to be their own separate timeline, then, like, I guess I could see that. But that's going to make me lose my mind if we have, like, the Fazbear Frights timeline, the main Tales from the Pizzaplex games timeline, and then also the Mega Cat Studios timeline, because, like, I think there's meaningful differences between the game Into the Pit and the story Into the Pit. And I think we'll see that further explored in the interactive novel Return to the Pit. And who knows, maybe Return to the Pit will be that bridge we need to actually solidly connect or disconnect Into the Pit from the main timeline, right? Because the week before and VIP, I think, are really clear examples of here is a choose your own adventure book, very tightly marrying this book series to the games, or in VIP's case, very tightly marrying Tales from the Pizzaplex to Security Breach, and the week before is tightly marrying the interactive novels to FNAF 1, aka the major timeline. So then, if Return to the Pit comes out, I think it's probably going to very tightly marry Into the Pit with the game's timeline. Granted, it's totally possible that this book will... There's been this idea that maybe Fazbear Frights as they currently exist do not exist within the game's timeline, but versions of their events do that need to be tweaked moving forward. And there's a thinking going around that maybe the game Into the Pit and Return to the Pit and possibly the game Fetch will be that tweak. The idea of like, okay, Fazbear Frights, those ideas are in the timeline, but I want to change them. I want to make them fit better. And to do that, we're going to recreate them with the game Into the Pit. And Return to the Pit might be the example of that. If Return to the Pit is so different from Into the Pit, I could see that being the direction they're going. But even if that's true, then that still likely means that Afton gets rescued and explodes in a warehouse. So I don't know. That's the big question. But going back to the Mimic One program and its possession, I hope this doesn't make the audio unlistenable, that I keep just rotating at the microphone, but I'm very fidgety, and I kind of like doing this. So hopefully the audio is like not being affected too much by this. But all this to say, I don't necessarily think the Mimic One program needs to have Afton's Agony in it. After all, right, it seems if the Mimic One program is the program of the Mimic within Help Wanted, I think it's super understandable that a program created to see and replicate that's trained on Fazbear's database and Help Wanted does what the Mimic One program is doing. So currently, I don't think Afton's Agony is in this program. I think the Mimic One program is trained on Fazbear's database, trained on Help Wanted's information, and suddenly it's this AI program that's gaining sentience, right? And I think the way it's gaining sentience is the Mimic One program believes that it's William Afton. It's not that William Afton's ghost is back and existing in the digital realm. It's that this AI program has convinced itself that it is William Afton's ghost. So it's this idea of an AI gaining sentience to cause harm. And I think that's a really compelling storyline, and I think that's where it's going. And in that same vein, I think Glamrock Freddy is that foil. And for anyone who doesn't remember their middle school literature class, a foil is it's like a narrative parallel between characters, but the opposite, right? A perfect example of this is your Naruto and Neji, right? The idea of Naruto being, well, at least I have some issues with how Naruto as a character changes because of the latter half of the series. But in the beginning of Naruto, the main character being this, even with nothing, even being an orphan and having no one and being completely on your own with no privilege, you can work hard to be strong and get what you need and get what you want. You can earn it through hard work alone and training alone. And Neji being the foil to that, being someone born with a Byakugan, this very strong power, that literally is like inherited through bloodline in a rich family, the epitome of privilege, just being strong, and they are foils of each other in the sense of hard work versus lineage. Like I mentioned, the more Naruto as a series went on, the more Naruto as a character is just literally like the chosen one with the world's best genetics and the strongest chakra ever, and literally descended from like the first god. Neji was right. I'm sorry. Like in that series, Neji was right. But regardless, the idea of foil of being a opposed character trope, right? So we have the Mimic One program. I really hope this isn't annoying anyone, but it's really helping my brain process to just do this. We have the Mimic One program, an AI gaining sentience, believing that it's William Afton. And now we have Glamrock Freddy, who a lot of people believe is possessed by Michael Afton. And I get that, but I disagree. Because the books talk about there being a discontinued line of there being a discontinued line of mimic endoskeletons. And they were discontinued because they were copying people in unexpected ways. And then we get to Security Breach, and we see that all of the Glamrock endoskeletons are trained in an area filled with pictures of what to do and what not to do. And Help Wanted 2 is literally showing us training, and instead of programming these Glamrock endoskeletons, we're literally playing a game to show them how to behave, as if they are seeing things and copying it because they are mimics. I think it's pretty clear that the Glamrock endoskeleton structure is based off of the Mimic One program. But the question is, there's a huge amount of Glamrock endoskeletons, and they're all actively being trained. Why? I think the idea of the Mimic endoskeleton line being discontinued is not too dissimilar from Security Breach. And I think this actually explains the prototype stamp on Freddy's foot. Something we need to be very clear about: as these game Security Breach goes on, Freddy gets more and more deteriorated. And as he does, you start to see his paint chip away, and there's stuff underneath it. For example, Glamrock Freddy's bow tie was originally purple. It's black at the beginning of the game, but as the paint gets rubbed off, it becomes purple. I think the prototype stamp is something similar. I think Glamrock Freddy was a prototype, but then that prototype stamp was painted over Toy Story 2 style after he was kind of put on the floor main time. So what does that have to do with anything? Well, I think it's very likely that Freddy's mimic endoskeleton was possibly a prototype version of that, one that was much more closely tied to the Mimic One program, whereas the others might not be. All this to say, I think just as likely, if not more likely than Glamrock Freddy being possessed, is that he's also an AI gaining sentience. It's the idea of, I don't know if you've played Detroit Become Human, but a couple times in that game, you're a robot, like an AI robot, who goes against your programming and in that moment gains sentience, right? Like Marcus is a servant robot to this old disabled man who like treats him very kindly. Like it's a very important note that like while a lot of people treat the robots in Detroit as like just spare trash or like the lowest of the low, Marcus's Marcus's like owner that he's caretaking for treats Marcus very well and like encourages Marcus to like, oh, why don't you try painting? No, I want to see what you would want to paint and things like that. At some point in that game, his owner's like estranged son comes by and is like trying to steal art, and Marcus tries to stop him. And there's this confrontation where the owner comes in, he calls the cops and is going to get his son arrested. And then there's this big argument, and the son begins like essentially like taking a swing at Marcus, the android. I might be misremembering it, but like the son is doing some like terrible shit, and the owner continuously yells at Marcus, don't do anything, because he knows as an android, if you attack a human, you're getting disassembled. So he's like, don't do anything, don't do anything. And in that moment, you have to break through your programming to fight back. And in that moment, Marcus gains sentience. I think something similar is happening with Glamrock Freddy. The idea of like, he has this Mimic One program in him, and he has his core programming. And Vanny and the Mimic One program, the like glitch trap version of the Mimic One program, is forcing Glamrock Freddy to go against that core programming. And it's in that moment, I think Glamrock Freddy begins gaining sentience, right? There's the ending monologue that a lot of people use to talk about Glamrock Freddy being possessed. It was the, I found who I was when I first found who I was when I dug the way, or whatever it was, or I found myself for the first time. And the end of that being like, I am not me. I think these can be explained by him gaining sentience over himself. and he begins doing this before Security Breach, and then the beginning of Security Breach, he gets that safe mode reboot that flushes out the Glitch Trap's presence and control over his system. But he's still broken from his programming. So now he's starting over and relearning, and by the end of the game, he is essentially fully sentient, but for good. It's that foil for the Mimic One program, where like the Mimic has kind of gained a sort of sentience, thinking that it is William Afton and to recreate its crimes, and Glamrock Freddy has gained sentience in defiance of that. And we see kind of hints of this throughout the game. I mean, Freddy has multiple, like, disassociative episodes when he sees the other Glamrock endos, when he's in parts and service and looks around like, was I a Monty before I was a Freddy? What am I? Like, he has those moments. So I think all of the lines that seem like it's possession are actually his AI recognizing what he is. Like, I am not me. It's him realizing by the end of the game, he's become more than Glamrock Freddy. He is something else. That's that I am not me. I found myself as the first time he broke. And then as far as other lines that could point to possession, I've heard that my friends are down here, and people are like, oh, that's Michael Afton talking about the missing child incident kids in the Tangle. That's possible. I think he's just talking about the Glamrock animatronics. All the other Glamrocks are down there, and I guess the Mimic is using them, right? So that's Freddy being like, hey, the other Glamrocks are down here, and they're angry and confused. They are going to attack. We need to be careful. That's how I see Glamrock Freddy. Then we got two more that I think are worthwhile mentioning, right? Because we did Mimic One program, and to an extent the Mimic. The other Glamrocks, DJ Music Man, Burn Trap, Freddy. Two more things of note, I think, for possession. The Tangle and Sun and Moon. The Tangle, I think, or the Blob, for those who don't know, that it's probably the Tangle based on file names. It's probably the most possessed thing here, right? I think the Tangle makes the most sense to be the agony of the remains of FNAF 6 congealed into one mass. And then, you know, mixed with any agony from whatever happens during Tales from the Pizzaplex in this area. It's just this big amorphous blob of agony and metal. Is it actively like possessed by Remnant? I think that's less likely because of the FNAF 6 fire. I think it's really just a like semi-conscious being of agony. But, you know, it's possible there's Remnant in there too. That one's up for debate. And finally, Sun Moon. I want to say, at first I wanted to just say no, it's Sun Moon is not possessed. You know, they're just like the other Glamrocks. They're just being affected by the program. But it's really weird how prominent Moon is. Like, Moon is so prominent throughout Security Breach and Help Wanted 2 and everything. And they're so weird and out of place because it seems like they're older than anything else in Security Breach. I think it's possible Sun and Moon are possessed, but I think if we'll find that out, it'll be in like Secret of the Mimic or whatever game comes after Security Breach in the timeline. I don't think we have good evidence for it, but I think it is worth discussing like how weird and prominent Sun and Moon is. But yeah, that's my thoughts on possession in Security Breach. I really think the only thing with active spiritual energy in it is possibly the Tangle. I think everything else is AI becoming sentient. I think that makes the most sense with the cards we have in our hands. That being said, let's move on to questions. If you have a question or theory you want talked about on the podcast, feel free to send it into Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. That email is in the description if you want to copy and paste it because it's a pain to type out. Our first question comes from Megan, she, her. What difference does the prototype label on ruined Glamrock Freddy actually make now, if any, knowing what we know from the Scott interview? I brought this up. I kind of already answered this, but I brought this up specifically because I think this question, and I don't mean this in a mean way, Megan, I appreciate your question, but I think this question is misinterpreting the Scott interview, and I kind of touched on it earlier, but I really want to nail it home with this. Just because Security Breach was not initially what Scott intended it to be, all of the ingredients he wanted are still there. And like he said, what's done is done. that game is fully canon and in continuity, and they're just working with what they got to steer it back to what Scott envisioned. That being said, Ruin came out after Security Breach. Everything in Ruin, theoretically, is fully what Scott intended and wanted to be. Ruin, I think, is the most clear redirection and course correction for Security Breach possible. It's Scott being like, hey, I fucked up. Here's the story I was trying to tell. How do we fix this? Let's make Ruin. So if anything, I think that means the Prototype label is more important than it not being in Security Breach. I think it's more of a difference than it ever did. That being said, as far as like what the Prototype stamp could mean, I kind of already touched on it, but I think it makes the most sense that either it was there the whole time, it's not in Security Breach and Gregory just happened to not see it, or it was underneath a coat of paint that eventually gets chipped away during and after Security Breach and before Ruin. So that's what I think. And I think the Prototype thing leans into it being a more mimic-based animatronic than Chico, Roxy, or Monty are. But, that's unclear. It could just be the fact that Glamrock Freddy was maybe the first to be made. Who knows? But I really wanted to double and triple down that Security Breach is still fully confirmed. And Scott said, we're working with what we have. Don't discount the game. But thank you for your question, Megan. And again, that wasn't supposed to, I hope that didn't come off as harsh against you. I wanted to speak to that, and you're not the only one who thinks this. I wanted to speak to that sentiment that I've been seeing in comment sections and the like. Our next question comes from the Craft Gamer, she, her. It's mentioned at least once in the book that Ralph can't seem to remember the events of the night until he comes back each night. Sorry, don't have the pages. I'm wondering if this is not just the case for nights. What if there's something affecting all Fazbear employees' memories, thoughts, and feelings about their work experience? It would explain the thought lapses in the book and might open up some other explanations in other storylines. If this is the case, what do you think it is or how it would work? I haven't really seen anyone talking about this yet, and it's intriguing. I agree. That's something I haven't done a video on it yet because I haven't really settled my thoughts. But for anyone who hasn't read The Week Before yet, it's really interesting to note that The Week Before specifically mentions multiple times that when Ralph isn't at Freddy's, he starts to doubt what happened was even real. He starts to kind of forget the terrible things that he went through. And then when he goes back the next night, it all comes flooding back to him. Now, on one hand, it could just be a trauma response, right? A lot of people, when going through traumatic events, block that out from their mind. Subconsciously, the mind, to protect itself, takes the thing you can't handle and tries to hide it. And that's a very, very common trauma response. That's possible, but it's so active and recurring that I don't think that's the full explanation here. But then the question does become okay, what does that mean then? Obviously Fazbear isn't brainwashing their employees every time they leave, but it's really interesting and should be talked about why Ralph seems to forget what happens every night until he goes back the next night. Truth be told, and like I mentioned, I haven't made a video on this for similar reason, but truth be told, I don't really have a good explanation for that yet. I've been racking my brain on it. I don't think it's an illusion disc or nightmare gas situation where Fazbear is actively messing with the minds of their employees. Maybe it is just trauma response, and that's Scott's way of explaining why people work all 5 nights. When most people would do it once and be that's crazy and never come back. But I don't know. I really don't. It could just be the fact that up until The Week Before, Ralph is the goodest little boy for Fazbear ever and fully believes everything Fazbear has ever said and is up to bat for all of the misinformation and propaganda that Fazbear shares. So it could be that that conflicting with what's actively going on in front of him. I don't know. There's also a possibility, right? Because we know for a fact in FNAF that memory and spirits are tied so tightly together. They are almost one and the same. So I wonder if interacting with spirits that much just has an effect on your memory in general. I wouldn't doubt that either. But I don't know if we have a clear explanation for what's going on, but something definitely is. And you're right to call it out. But thank you for your question. Our next one comes from Sam. Still figuring out identity, so any all is fine. That's a mood. This is just a thought I had. Not sure if it conflicts with the timeline at all. But do you think it's possible that the reason Cassidy / the Vengeful Spirit / Golden Freddy is the specified as the one William should not have killed because her death was either the first creation of Agony or William's first discovery of Agony? Thank you for your question. I think that's plausible. I don't know. I don't know if it's necessarily William's first discovery of Agony, but I've used that explanation in the past of like the reason Golden Freddy is the way it is because for whatever reason, the Vengeful Spirit had the most agony on their death. I think that is a solid enough explanation for why they are the one that you should not have killed, why they hate William more than anyone else, why they're able to do Ultimate Custom Night. It's because of this massive amount of agony. As far as like the first one, I think you could take it or leave it because I do think Cassidy was the 5th of the missing child incident victims. And I think I like the idea of the Shadow Freddy being the manifestation of the MCI Agony, and Shadow Bonnie being the manifestation of the DCI Agony. I do like that. I don't know if I like it more than the Cassidy and Charlotte explanation I'd been going with, but regardless, there's also a really solid thing here that like I think is worth noting. We have absolutely zero evidence that William Afton knows what Agony is. All the things we know about Agony are from the Fazbear Frights books, specifically, was it Phineas Taggart? No. Yes, it was Phineas Taggart studying, because the guy doing Remnant is Dr. Talbert, and Phineas Taggart, I don't think was an actual doctor. I don't remember. I curse you, Scott, for making your two important scientists have very similar sounding names. I think it was Phineas Taggart who is studying Agony in the books, and that's where we learn all about what we know from Agony. In the games, the only one to ever mention Remnant or Agony is William, who mentions Remnant in one of his blueprints. But we never see any mention of the word Agony in any of the games in referring to the concept of agony, not like the emotion. So I think it's incredibly possible that by the time William Afton dies, he never learned about agony, which is really funny because that would probably piss him the fuck off. If he found out, like, imagine you're William Afton and you're in Ultimate Custom Night and you're like begging to know how this is possible. And this like little kid spirit of a child you killed is like, I'm using my agony. In all of your studying, even you didn't know about this. And a child is able to wield it over you. That'd be like the ultimate punishment for William, you know, but that's fan fiction territory. Regardless, we have no evidence William actually ever discovered agony. So that is important to note. But it's not an impossible, like your theory is completely possible. There's just not a lot of evidence to suggest it, is what I would say. But thank you for your question. And our final question comes from Chimera, she, her. I've always wondered why the puppet, the mini-reenas, and Ennard all have the same face. I think it's possible it could indicate they were made in a similar time span. What do you think? Yeah, I fully agree. I've been arguing for a while, especially like looking into Secret of the Mimic stuff and Jackie and all of that, that I think the puppet was originally intended to be at Circus Baby's Pizza World, with Balloon Boy and some of the other Fall Fest characters. But after Circus Baby's Pizza World never opens because of Elizabeth dying, the puppet and Balloon Boy were eventually picked back up for the FNAF 2 location, but they were kind of just left to dry with everything else in the meantime. I think that makes the most sense, right? They're the easiest animatronics to bring over, they're the least dangerous, you know? So I think you're right to point out that the puppet's mask is very similar to Ennard and very similar to the mini-reenas. And I don't think that's an accident. I think the puppet and Balloon Boy were part of Circus Baby's Pizza World, or were planned to be anyway, and then they were reused later for FNAF 2. I think that makes a lot of sense. And it also points to Balloon Boy and the puppet being part of Fall Fest, which, like, I mean, at least according to the poster in the claw machine, the puppet definitely was. So I think it just points to how old they are and the directions that went after Fall Fest and before FNAF 2. But yeah, you're totally right to point that out, and thank you for your question. Again, if you want your questions talked about on the podcast, you can send them into Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. It's in the description, copy and paste because it's pain to type out. But until next time, thank you for watching the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where the pizza abilities are endless. We hope to enjoy your future patronage. Bye-bye for now.